I first began by drawing a composition on the same size piece of paper as the linoleum block. When finalizing the composition, you want to make sure to press down on each line to make sure it's dark enough that when you transfer, the image will transfer correctly. Turn your drawing over and then start to press down with the backside of the lino cutter to transfer the image. The transferring will take a few minutes, so please be patient. Transferring is a one-shot deal. You won't be able to take the paper off and then realize you didn't transfer something and try to put it back on because it's not going to line up perfectly. So make sure that while you're going, you can lift up a corner of the paper to kind of see if something's transferred, but overall, this is a one-shot deal. You'll notice that the image is reversed because it was flipped over, but once printing, it'll go back to its normal state. That means that if you have any words or numbers, they will be backwards when carving, but then when you print, they'll go back to normal. Now it's time to start cutting with your lino cutter. Here I'm showing how to take apart the lino cutter to make sure you can put the tip in correctly. The inner part of the tip is in two pieces, and those two pieces fit together perfectly. In between those two pieces is where the gouge tip fits into place perfectly. There are 3 different tips that I'm using, a 1, 2, and 3, and you'll see that I point out how I know which one is which by the number on the back side of the tip. On the back side of the gouge tip there's writing, and that's how you know that that part goes back into the tip. Once you put the gouge tip in, tighten all the way and you'll notice that you can no longer see the writing on the back side of the gouge tip. Make sure to put all the other gouge tips back in the handle and put the top back on. That way you don't lose any gouge tips. Notice how the handle fits perfectly in my palm, and I'm going to be using my index finger to apply pressure. Before you start carving on your final lino block, you can turn it over and practice on the back side. There may be certain shapes that you're worried about on your composition that you would prefer practicing first, and this is a great way to do so. It's also important to understand which gouge tip makes which line, and so that's why I'm recommending you practice on the back side of your lino block. Carving takes precision, practice, and patience. This step of block printing should take a few days. Carving this linoleum block took a total of 1 hour. It's important to remember that I do have experience with linoleum block printing, and that is why it took me 1 hour, and for beginners it may take twice or 3 times as much. It's important you understand this so you don't try rushing through. Remember, whatever you carve away will be white, and whatever you leave will be black. If you carve too much away, you will not be able to put it back. This is why it's recommended to do test prints before carving too much away and realizing you did so. Notice that when I'm carving, I'm not digging the gouge tip into linoleum. I've found that some beginners dig so deep they put a hole in their linoleum block, and that's not what you should be doing. Don't get lazy. Make sure to use all 3 gouge tips even if you have to keep switching back and forth. Variation of gouge tips makes a world of difference. Texture is imperative in block printing, so it's important to use all 3 tips that are given to you. In order to show texture of the tree bark in my grass, I chose to do different notches. What I mean by that is I quickly lifted up my gouge tip to create little dots to show that there is grass. Giving texture to natural elements will make your composition more realistic. When showing there are leaves on the tree, I did the same idea as the grass, however I used a different gouge tip and I also created chunks. Those chunks give the illusion that the tree is full of leaves. Now it's time to begin printing. I first start by making sure my linoleum block is nice and square to the table at a 90-degree angle. I tape down my linoleum block so it doesn't move. And then I take a ruler and measure 1 inch up from the top and 1 inch from the side to create another template with tape. This tape will help me line up my paper so that there is a 1 inch border around my entire linoleum block evenly. Without this template, it's very difficult to make sure your paper is laid down properly on your linoleum block. I then squeeze about 1/4 of a size of black block printing ink onto my inking plate and then take the brayer and start to roll it on the printing plate. Roll in different directions until you start hearing a sticky sound. That traction is important to show that the brayer has enough ink on it and it's spread out evenly. Once I feel like I have enough ink on my brayer, I begin to apply it to the block. It's important to keep your hand as level as possible and don't press down too hard. If you press down too hard, you may push some of the block printing ink into your lines, creating flooding. Make sure to roll the ink in different directions during this process. Once your block is completely covered in ink and you don't see any of the block color showing, you go ahead and grab a piece of paper. Make sure your hands are clean. Do not get ink on any part of the paper that you're holding. Carefully line up the top left corner of your paper to your template that you made and gently lay it straight down onto your block. Take your baren and begin gently smoothing the baren across the paper to press the ink onto the paper. It takes practice to figure out how much pressure you need to put on, so again, this will take a few times to get used to. I would recommend pressing harder than you think you need to press to make sure the ink gets put onto the paper. Worst comes to worst, next time you just put less pressure on the baren. Gently lift one corner of the paper and peel it off your block print. Not gonna lie, this first print was my best print, which usually does not happen. However, I did find a few imperfections, like one of the cats in the bottom window is flooded, as well as the number 1 gouge tip lines that are in the tree on the left-hand side. Those type of observations should be observations that you make with your prints, and that is why you print a few times. I ask that all students start with black ink because the contrast between black and white is really helpful to see imperfections or areas you need to fix. And then from there, when you get the hang of it, you can go ahead and choose a different color ink or a different color paper. Remember to make a composition using a number 2 pencil and create a line drawing with dark lines. When cutting into your linoleum block, make sure you use the right size gouge tip and also have patience. Do not dig in your linoleum. Remember that anything you carve away will be white and whatever you leave will be black. Do not carve too much away because you won't be able to put it back. Keep your hands clean when printing so you don't have finger marks all over your prints. Make sure to listen for the sticky sound when you're adding ink to your brayer. Creating texture in a linoleum block is so important, so make sure to use all 3 gouge tips and different techniques to create texture. And lastly, this form of art takes a lot of practice and patience, so take your time, and it's okay if you mess up, just keep on trying.